My guest today calls himself the world's first Darwinian paediatrician. Before he ever went to medical school, Dr. Paul Turke spent months doing fieldwork on a tiny Micronesian atoll called Ifaluk, watching how grandparents, parents, and children actually cared for one another. Research that helped shape the grandmother hypothesis for why humans live so long. He went on to become a paediatrician and has spent the last 25 years treating kids by asking why, not just how. In this conversation, we get into whether getting all the childcare bugs over with early actually holds up, what co-sleeping and sleep training look like through an evolutionary lens, and a theory linking how much we hold our babies to sensory issues later in life. This is Dr. Paul Turke. Could you just start by maybe explaining what the grandmother hypothesis is to us?
Sure. It's the idea that women evolved menopause and a post-direct reproductive phase of life in order to care for their children's children, and that the fitness payoff from doing that exceeded the fitness payoff from continuing to reproduce directly. And so that's the most accepted explanation for the evolution of menopause, and then the grandmothering behavior that you see all across the world, especially in traditional society.
When do we think that this started to evolve in humans or pre-human species?
That's a good question, and I think probably no one knows exactly for sure, but the seems most likely that we human females, women, and if you look at our most closely related ape relatives that are around today, they both stop ovulating and producing more children at around 40 years of age. But in the chimps and other apes, which are the model for the pre-split ancestor, everything else declines in ages also. So they don't have this long post-reproductive lifespan. Their heart, lung, liver, kidneys, ovaries, everything sort of declines all at once. And so the idea is that back when we split off from the other apes, the hominoid-hominin divergence, about 6 million years ago, that at some point we were the females that were around at that time in the common ancestor increasingly were able to be helpful to their children that they've already produced. And eventually that kept natural selection stronger for longer, and that held off the ravages of aging or senescence, which allowed them to live longer and longer, eventually long enough to be around when their first children started having children. So that was the grandmother thing then, and that's the best way to help your first children and then second children and so on, is to be there to help to raise those little ones that come along. So it probably all started back shortly after the split, but we don't know precisely the timing of when females were living long enough to actually grandparents. We know it had happened long before 300,000 years ago with the emergence of Homo sapiens. It was probably the estimates, if you go back at least 1 million years. We have a pretty good idea of how long maximum potential lifespans were in the past, and the reason we have a pretty good idea is because they correlate well with brain to body size ratio and with tooth eruption, and those things fossilize. So we can look at all the apes that are around today and say, this is the brain to body size ratio, and then we can just project back and say, well, this is what it was. for Homo erectus, say. And so we can calculate that Homo erectus was probably had a maximum lifespan, almost as great as ours, around 1 million years ago or so. So we expect that there's been grandmothering for a long, long time, even though I can't tell you whether it was, 4 million years ago, 6 million years ago, or just 1 million years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, a bit hard to go into the crystal ball that long ago.
Yeah.
Now, that sort of flows into some of your very sort of early research that you were doing, and looking at sort of different cultures around the world. So what did you see specifically when you were doing some work in Micronesia that I guess prompted you to reconsider some things, and especially the cooperative childcare and the sort of kinship networks?
Yeah, well, I was a young graduate student looking for a problem to try to help solve, and one of the things that was popular at the time was a study of the so-called demographic transition, the fact that nowadays in modern industrial societies, we aren't having nearly as many children as we used to have. Many of the modern societies around today are below replacement level, as I'm sure you know. And but back, if you go to a traditional society, you ask people how many children they want to have, and they look at you like, well, duh, as many as possible. So there's this transition in what they were calling at the time demand for children, and that's the demographic transition. And the most popular hypothesis back then was that it was called the wealth flows hypothesis and the old age security hypothesis. It was the idea that in traditional societies, children essentially make you rich and begin to give you more resources than they take after a certain age. But that, and so, so it would make economic sense to say, when that switched, when all of a sudden we got to pay for college tuition and do all the other things we do in modern societies, all of a sudden kids become more expensive. And so wealth flows were said to switch from children up to their parents, up to parents down to the children throughout life. And so that changed the demand for children. And people didn't want to have nearly as many because they no longer made you rich. Well, that idea never made much sense from an evolutionary point of view, because it seemed to be suggesting that we live as long as we do in order to economically exploit the children that we've already have. And so the data that the demographers and economists had been collecting that sort of supported that idea, I thought was very weak, because it was survey data where they would go into a traditional culture and say, hey, why do you want to have as many children as you do? And like I said a minute ago, they'd look at them like, what? Of course we want to have children. And so then I thought they probably were teasing out answers, telling them, well, do you have them because you want them to take care of you, and blah, blah, blah. And they often got the yes answers, but I didn't believe it, because it just didn't make sense, again, that we would live as long as we do to be burdens on our children. So in any case, I wanted to go and look at actual behavior. So I had this idea in mind from some evolutionary biologists saying that that older people were reproductively useful indirectly by being helpful. I had that in mind, and so I went to Ifaluk, was a little atoll in Micronesia. Had about 450 people on it. It's only about a quarter square mile of usable land area, and I thought, well, these people are kind of they're friendly. There's not a lot of diseases like malaria. Some of them speak English. They're trapped by the Pacific Ocean. They're a captive audience. My wife and I, Laura Betsy, we could go there and look at actually what people of all ages were doing. And so we did sort of what was called behavioral scans, where we'd walk around and just record at certain times a day what people were doing. We got to know them, and we'd walk by and see that, Grandpa so and so was showing his little grandson how to make, arrow tip for spearing fish or something like that. So we would document all those things. And after we were done doing that for many months, we were able to show that, in fact, children, especially older children, do things to help older people, but that it's way in the other direction, that the old people were almost always doing something helpful, and the kids were often just playing, goofing around. And when an older child did do something to help, that those resources were often quickly recycled back down. So I was the first person to empirically demonstrate, along with my wife Laura Bessig, that resources did flow downwards in a traditional society, and that old people were helpful, and that also showed that firstborn daughters were very helpful. If you had a daughter as your first child, they got to a certain age where they were helpful, and so you went on to have a bigger family if you had a firstborn daughter.
All right.
So my data was the first to show that, but I was not working in a hunter-gatherer society. So others, friends of mine, Kristen Hawks, Hilly Kaplan, Kim Hill, Maggie Hurtado, people working in hunter-gatherer societies, soon were on the case, and they collected a lot of corroborating data. And since then, a lot of anthropology departments have focused on collecting that kind of information. In a new generation of anthropologists, Rebecca Sear, people like that, are looking at that sort of stuff still today. And it looks like it's pretty well validated that wealth does indeed, even in the most traditional societies, even in existing hunter-gatherer societies, the old people are useful. We don't have, in those types of societies, we don't have the lingering, incapacitated periods that we find in modern societies where where old people can be kept alive on machines and whatever, for years and years, and probably they are a burden in our societies in many cases. But in those traditional societies, they're helpful until near the very end of their life, and then they're gone, and everybody's sad about it. But life goes on, So that's what brought us to Ifaluk, a wonderful group of people, just really, really wonderful parents, and we learned a lot from them.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. The that last part you were mentioning sort of brings me into the, I guess, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges or the big shifts in raising children, especially, but the grandparents being useful, and how we live in modern life, I guess, and how that has changed so much.
Right. Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're getting at, and there's a lot of things. I mean, first of all, there's the mobility that didn't used to be there. The people who lived on Ifaluk and some nearby islands like Yap, they a lot of them had never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. And that's true in hunter-gatherer societies. Some of them would have bigger ranges. They'd walk, maybe 100 miles so over the course of different seasons and things. But there were no cars, trains, automobile, planes. There was no mobility like we have now. So in modern societies, often as people get older, they've raised their children. That the children move off to different places, and they're not there available to help without making substantial efforts to do so. And that's a mismatch. That's something new. But the other thing is, in modern societies, a lot of old people older people are not as healthy as we probably were in the past. On Ifaluk, like I said, they were healthy, doing things, climbing trees, getting coconuts, doing stuff until the last few months of their lives. Whereas here, access to more calories than we need, and other things that are not healthy for us, lack of exercise. Again, you don't have to walk miles and carry heavy things and do all that just to keep yourself alive like you did then. You just have to drive through the drive-through, at the fast food place, and many people have kind of lived that lifestyle for a long time, and so even if their grandchildren are close, they're really not as positioned to do a lot of helpful things as they once were. So those are two of the big ones. And the other one, as I was sort of alluding to a minute ago, was that with modern medical care, unfortunately, we have, I think, as Peter Attia, I don't know if you know of his podcast, but Peter calls it slow death. We have slow death now, where we keep people alive, but in a largely incapacitated state for years, and so they linger and they're not able to be all that helpful, unfortunately. So yeah, I go through a lot of that in my book. Do you mind if I just flash my book?
Yeah, sure.
Bringing Up Baby, an Evolutionary View of Pediatrics. I talk about in that book, how you need to keep active and keep healthy. A lot of the book is about what you do to take care of babies and children of all ages, but it's also about how to be a good grandparent, and that sort of thing. Staying active, and so I've been all my life. My research has been focused on longevity, the evolution of lifespans, and so on. And I'm still working on that. And so, again, that's sort of the connection to the grandmother hypothesis. Is I wanted to explain why we live as long as we do, and it's because selection was stronger for longer, because we stayed useful for longer. And so those are some of the reasons why life is different for parents now. I feel for some, especially mothers in poorer areas, especially where they might be just in an apartment with the father might not be around, or if he is, he's gone a lot because he's trying to find a job or work, and the grandparents are long gone, and they're just, it's just stifling to try to be taking care of 2 or 3 children under 10 on your own without help. And it's no wonder that people's desire to have a lot of children is declining in that situation. If you have a lot of help, you have grandma and grandpa around, or other relatives around, or friends, there are communities that can help. And even good daycare systems can take some of the pressure off. There are bad daycare systems where they're overburdened too, and those aren't good for children. They're not, they're a mismatch too. But a good daycare system with children of different ages. Here in our state of Michigan, we have Montessori schools where they start at 2, 3, 4 years of age, and they have kids of different ages in the classrooms, and that sort of mimics what we used to have in ancestral times. It's a bit of a mismatch, a lot of the ways things are done, to stick 200 13-year-olds into a school building, that's not ever the way it used to be. We would have older kids, younger kids. They would help each other, teach each other. They were often related, of course. And so all of those things you know, alter the way children are raised, make it harder for parents to raise them. But I think also, put some pressure on children. That it's stressful to be in those environments. Some of them. So
yeah, definitely. I've point you raised a little while ago, but a big thing since having got a 2.5-year-old son, and then we've got another baby due in about 6 weeks' time, actually. So big, like younger, you don't really think about it, but just taken for granted having grandparents close by when the kids come along. It's such a an asset, and it helps so much. And it's not just a one-way thing. You see the relationship that the young children start to form with those grandparents, and it's really wonderful to see that bond and that connection. And also how hard it must be for people who really don't have resources around, and like you said, even the community side of things, which around the world, you see that side of things dropping away a lot,
right,
in especially Western cultures too, where organized community is it's almost non-existent in a lot of places.
Sure. And you're absolutely right to say it works both ways. When I say investment goes mostly downwards, I don't mean things like happiness and contentment and fulfillment. The grandchildren that I have that live closest to me, that I see regularly, they're on this just left on this 3-week trip with their parents to travel around the state and to go visit the other grandparents and so on. And we'll be getting back together in 3 weeks at my son's house where my other 2 grandchildren live. But I'm all of a sudden feeling like, wow, what am I going to do? And I can imagine just not feeling as useful, and it is can weigh on you if it goes on for years and years. I mean, there's only so much pleasure you can get out of sitting on the beach, drinking your Mai Tai and golfing and stuff. I mean, those things are great. You don't want to do none of those things ever, or not have any time. But after a while, not have something as real as children around, your grandchildren in particular, to bond with, as you say, and to just interact with and teach. At the end of the day, you come home tired maybe, but feeling like, well, that was really cool, and I miss the little guy, so. So as I've gotten older, I've turned my attention a little bit more to that sort of idea. There's a lot of unhappiness amongst older people in Western societies. I think that, if I'm remembering correctly from my book, the statistic was that I think 24.3% of women over 60 in the U.S. are on or have recently been on antidepressant medications. Well, a couple of grandchildren can replace that Prozac pretty readily, I think. If you're vigorous enough to do it and hang out with them, I just think they really, as you were saying, contribute to the happiness of the older folks. As much as we help them, they also help us as we get into our later years, still have meaning in our life.
I did want to bring up, so we sort of say childcare most of the time in Australia, but obviously, daycare is universal, the language we use. And you mentioned it a little bit before, but big thing you hear about daycare is how, sick the kids get. It's just a sort of revolving door of illnesses.
Yeah.
And one, I guess, sort of common line you hear from parents and even clinicians is that, getting all your bugs at daycare is obviously hard, but it's better to just get it over and done with early, and it's good for their immune system, and they're going to get sick anyway. So just why delay the inevitable, from your point of view, is there any truth to that, or is it a bit
Well,
overblown?
yeah, that there's a bit of truth to it, but it covers some things up. I mean, the devil's in the details. If you're getting exposed to a lot of germs when you're 2 months old as opposed to 2 years old, there's a big difference in how developed the immune system is. And it is true that the immune systems we do develop memory, and so if you've been exposed, say when if you start going to preschool or daycare when you're 2 or 3, when you're past the more vulnerable periods, when your immune system is up and running pretty well, you do develop memory, and so when you get to kindergarten, you're probably less likely to catch some of the things that the child who didn't get exposed at age 2, 3, and 4 is going to get. So there is a little truth to that, but yeah, the very young kids, there's more risks associated with catching some of these things early. They're sicker longer. And from the parents' point of view, daycare is not cheap. I mean, maybe there's varies from country to country depending on how much it's been socialized and so on. But here in the States, at least, parents are paying lots of dollars, and then they've got to keep the kid out of daycare half the time anyway, because there's rules. If you have a fever or a cough or a runny nose, you got to stay home. And of course, I hate to see this stuff, but parents manipulate. They'll dose the child up with a fever reducer in the morning, send them to daycare because they don't want to miss work, and then at 3 o'clock when it wears off, daycare's calling saying, "Come and get your child because the fever's back," and then they're trying to squeeze them into my office at the end of the day and have us see them and so on. So there's some truth to what you were saying about get it in, get it over with, but there's also more problems with it when you start real early. So if you can pull it off, and I know not everybody can, it's nice if you can have grandma and grandpa around for those first few years. And after that, children themselves, start to pay much more attention to other children, and it's nice for them to have some other kids around to play with and so on, as long as it's in a good setting that's not too overcrowded and they're being supervised appropriately with, there's a good ratio of caretakers to children. Again, that sort of mimics the hunter-gatherer days when you had lots of kin around to help out. It wasn't just one caretaker, mom with a couple of kids. It was mom, dad, older sister, grandma, all kind of helping out, and then a group of other kids playing. On Ifaluk, the 3 and 4-year-olds used to go down to the boat houses on the shore with the dads, and the dads would kind of watch them playing at the beach while they were making their fishing nets and building canoes and doing all that kind of stuff. And that's the way children played and were entertained and supervised and learned the skills of their culture along the way. Again, there are some good schools and there are some not so good schools. In the good schools, it mimics that to some extent. It can't completely, because the teachers and teachers' assistants aren't relatives. They can't love them like grandma does, But again, once they're older, they have to go out into the world too, and that's fine. I'm not suggesting to anybody that we want to all become hunter-gatherers again. We can't do that, and we won't do that. But we can try to think about and design our schools and our childcare in a way that at least partially mimics the way we evolved to count on things happening. Humans, if anything, are flexible, and so we manage to adapt to a lot of different circumstances. Even terrible circumstances of war and that kind of stuff. It's amazing to me that some of them. There's obviously more problems, but people get through it. But we can certainly make life easier and more enjoyable, I think, if we learn some lessons from our evolutionary past.
Yeah, I agree. What if you had the power to make some changes from a practical standpoint, specifically at schools, I guess, what would be the first sort of steps you would take to make it a bit more of that sort of not hunter-gatherer exactly, but you know what I mean?
I would like to see the more age groups interacting together more often, and spending as much time outside as possible, being a little bit more free form in our education, letting kids follow their interests more. In traditional schools, at least in the States here, we have this growth of a population and diagnosis of what we call ADHD kids, and they get labeled as sort of abnormal, but in most cases it's just that they are more active learners. They like to be outside. They are not as inclined as some children are to just sit there and pay attention when something's boring to them. Those are the kids who, in a hunter-gatherer society, might be off hunting, whereas the kids who were able to sit there at their desk and do the teacher's bidding were more likely to be maybe back at camp, fashioning tools or something like that. There was more room for different styles of learning, different styles of different brains, different capacities. I like to explain it in terms of sports. If you're 5'6", you might be suited more for the soccer team than the basketball team, or so on. And we all learn in different ways, and I would like to see more flexibility, and you get that, I think, automatically when you start mixing age groups a little bit. The child who's really interested in science, who's maybe 7 or 8, can go hang out with the 11-year-old who's already doing some pretty cool scientific stuff and can learn from the 11-year-old. And also more and more for our mental health, we're learning that it's good to be able for kids to be able to get outside and be active. We've pared back some of the physical activity and recess and that stuff that we used to have when I was a child. The pandemic with the COVID thing really hampered that a lot. I think we're getting back to it, but I would like to see more of that. I think schools that emphasize outdoor activities and playing and letting kids organize themselves some things were good. Not that I'm against organized sports for kids, which is a slightly different topic, but kids being able to organize their own sports, pick teams and do stuff, enforce the rules, do those kinds of things on their own. That's all part of sociality and all part of what childhood is about, is learning how we live in a hyper-social world compared to the other primates. And that's what childhood is about, is learning how to be social, how to get along, but also how to get ahead. And hopefully getting ahead by not harming somebody else, but so there's cooperation and competition, and those are things that children have to learn, and we they start very early. I don't know. You have a 2.5-year-old. You said he or she's probably already learned how to manipulate you in certain ways.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you have to do to get along in our world. So yeah.
So when you do see, and I'm sure you probably see it with in your clinic as well, but the rise in teens' anxiety, distress, mental health issues.
Yeah.
What's the first place your brain goes to as an evolutionary thinker?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's evolutionary mismatch of environment. The big thing that's changed, recently, not other than just the COVID thing that some of the kids nowadays have gone through, but is the phones and the screens. I just have so many children who they'll come in with anxiety or depression, sadness, and you start asking them what they do, and their parents say, well, they get home from school and they lock themselves in their room and they're on their screen and they don't come out, And so I think that is a relatively new mismatch item that we have to learn to deal with. And again, getting kids outside, doing sports, theater, other activities, being with friends, real social interaction rather than virtual interaction, and those are important things for kids to do. But of course, I mean, you and I are virtual now. Kids have to learn that. It's not that you don't want to do zero of that. It's part of going to be part of life more and more. But there's too much of it, and it's too extreme. And I find that the kids, that's the first thing I ask when somebody's in with, anxiety or feeling sad and down, is, well, what are you spending your time doing,
Yeah, that actually sort of reminds me of earlier when you mentioned how when older people get a little bit disheartened or maybe depressed or lonely because they're not feeling useful in that stage of their life, then potentially the teens being in a similar boat where they're not doing the things that we always used to, whether it's helping out the younger kids or learning from people a little bit older than them, they're stuck in their little social media bubbles and everything. So it could be part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we're to figure out how to deal with that. It's just it's a tough one, but again, getting outside, being active, big part of it. So
yep. I don't know if you saw, but last year in Australia, I think we were the first country to sort of put in place the social media ban on kids that were under 16.
Yes.
And I think overall, I don't think it's, it hasn't, I think there was a stat, I think that 75% of those kids are still accessing it because it's pretty easy to get around. But
yeah,
it's at least what countries are trying now, and it won't be a perfect strategy. There'll be some hiccups, but I think hopefully in the next few years, there's some actual movement in the right direction.
I think so. Yeah, I applauded that when I heard it, and I'd like to see other countries, including the states, moving in that direction. But it's like you say, the kids are smart. They figure out ways to get around it and all of that. But we have to figure out ways to move in that direction, I think.
Yeah, I actually had a client who they are a teacher at one of the sort of prestigious schools around this area, and they had I think they were a 16-year-old come up to them because they have like a no phone ban sort of thing at the school, but the student actually came up and said, I know I'm addicted to this, but I don't know how to stop. Like we need actual help from the adults.
Right.
So it was, they're aware of it, but
they're aware.
Obviously, how do we actually tackle it? Which is, I found that quite powerful.
Yeah, no, that's right. And in some ways it's related to the lack of kinship networks and the lack of help. Because if you're a parent and you have say an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old come home from school and you're busy, you got to do things and whatever. All right, they're in their room, they're safe, they're on their phone, okay, whatever. Um, yeah, if you had more help around, you could say, get out of your room, let's go out and jump on the trampoline or do some other stuff, go for a walk in the woods. Let's it all kind of feeds back on itself. Um, I know when I'm talking to parents in the exam room and the child who is telling me that she, hasn't left her room basically in weeks, and the parents, I can tell they're feeling guilty about it, but they're busy and they don't have a lot of help, and it's easy for them to fall into that trap. And so, the more we can do to, I'm on this bandwagon of telling grandparents it's good for you and it's good for the kids, and why don't you move back, to where your kids live? And it's hard. I mean, people have moved off and they're separated. And the kids, if you have two or three of them, one might live in one area and another in another area. And it's hard, but making the effort is very, very important, I think, and it would be so good for everybody. It's not a magic bullet, and there is not one thing that's going to fix everything, but I think that's a really important component, or a really important mismatch when we compare the way we used to live with how we live now. And although we are flexible, like I said, as a species, our brains have evolved to count on certain things happening, certain inputs, and that sort of thing. And I think some of those inputs we're getting virtually online are not the right inputs.
Going into, I guess, some of those very, very early inputs, and whether you think there's any link to the health later on, but sort of infant sleep is a big industry all over the world. Like, what's the right thing to do? How do I get my baby to sleep? If you sort of strip away all the sleep advice and the Instagram sort of hot topic sort of things, what does it actually look like for normal infant sleep evolutionarily, and how far away are we from that at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, it's a very personal decision about whether you bring baby into bed with you or whether you don't. But I think you certainly don't want to have lock baby in a room down the hall and just baby will cry, baby will learn eventually that nothing works, and they just kind of give up on you. And that's one way to get sleep for everybody, but I don't advise that. In the States, the American Academy of Pediatrics is very much against co-sleeping, and I think that they don't have good grounds for being as adamant or strict about it as they are. I think that we until very recently in human evolutionary history, everybody co-slept. Primates all co-slept. That was just the way it was done. And of course, infant mortality was high back in the day, in hunter-gatherer traditional societies. But nobody's come up with evidence showing it was high because of co-sleeping. It's high because of diarrhea illnesses and other things like that. But I look to the countries in Europe and Asia where they're doing co-sleeping more, and in Japan, for example, they've been doing it. The majority of people for a long, long time, and they actually have half the infant sudden deaths that we do in the States.
Oh wow!
So my view is that if you want to co-sleep, co-sleep, but there's dangerous co-sleeping and there's safe co-sleeping, and you got to do it the safe way. If it's done safely, it can actually be easier for everybody to get sleep. because mom just kind of rolls over and does what a German anthropologist I know calls breast sleeping. And if you're doing it wisely, it can work out best for everybody. But of course, if you're trying to do it on a couch or something where baby can get trapped in the pillows, or if you've taken drugs or sleeping pills or got drunk or whatever, then it's dangerous co-sleeping, and you don't want to do those kinds of things. But done safely, I think it can work very well. And as I said, it's the way it's been done, for millions and millions of years, even before we split off from the other primates. So it's really something that our brains and even our anatomy have evolved to count on. When babies are placed alone by themselves, just told to lie on their back in a bassinet, we get some flattening of the head, and we get some torticollis because they're not moved into different positions, so the neck muscles develop asymmetrically sometimes. Those are anatomical problems that occur as a side effect of not sleeping the way we used to sleep with our babies. And again, I don't want anybody who's drinking a fifth of alcohol sleeping with their baby, but if you do it safely, the statistics show that it's actually not quite as bad as some of the as the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, says it is. But again, as I said, I'm not telling anybody what they have to do. It's a very personal decision, but the evidence against it is not as strong as I think it's presented as sometimes.
What do, say, countries like Japan that sort of it's very normal? What do if any, the sort of pediatric societies over there, what are their sort of recommendations, and how do they, practice
I don't know
safe
the answer
sleeping?
to that. I'm not sure what they're saying. I can imagine that they're not against it because most people do it. There in Japan, at least in the not too distant past, there was more sleeping on mats and futons and things, which, again, if you're on a big fluffy bed with lots of heavy comforters and stuff, may be a little bit more dangerous. But I would suggest to like a dad who's going to have their first baby, and they're worried about things like this, buy yourself a 10-pound bag of potatoes and put it in bed with you, and see if you really are going to sleep on top of that. You're probably not going to. It's not as much of a risk as you think, unless you've taken drugs or something. So.
Yeah. I was actually surprised. So, my son's obviously bigger now, but when he was younger, we would sleep with him quite a lot. Well, and now it is every night still. But yeah, I was actually surprised that I've sort of had a couple of those worries about, oh no, what if I roll over or something? And you soon realize, it doesn't really happen.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Right.
So you brought it up, the sleep training. I guess when people think of sleep training, that sort of traditional sort of leave them in a room by themselves and sort of let themselves figure it out. Do you think that then has any like negative ramifications longer term in terms of development?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of good data on that, but I think it could. Again, I'll go back to my statement that humans are flexible. We cope with a lot. So as long as your parents are loving and take good care of you in other circumstances, you'll probably turn out all right, even if that happened. But, you're always playing the odds here, and if you're short shrifting the child in one respect and then another respect and another respect. It all can add up. And I think the best way, from my point of view, we did it with our kids. Is to have them near you, and they get the most emotional support from that. And I won't say that by doing that it guarantees they'll never grow up to have anxiety or depression or anything like that. But I just think that every little step you can make that's correct is going to lead to a better outcome in the end. So none of us are perfect, though. So
no, definitely not.
Yeah.
On your episode on modern wisdom, I remember you mentioning that I think you were speculating a little bit, but you're sort of saying whether there was a possible link between the reduced amount of time we hold our babies now and more time in quiet rooms or in artificial sort of containers being sort of just left alone, and sensory issues later on. Right. Would you be able to unpack that idea maybe?
Yeah. Well, when we're brand new, we're very young. Our brains are very flexible. They're growing rapidly, and all of the inputs that we receive are helping to model that brain and helping to model our psyches. And so, if we evolved for 1 million years or so to get inputs of a certain sort, like being carried around all the time, different orientations, hearing different sounds, different voices, being held by different people, different caretakers. If we take away those inputs, I think there's a reasonable basis for thinking that some of the sensory issues that children have these days could result from some of those altered inputs. Nobody's really, I want them all to read my book and or listen to Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom podcast, maybe design more studies to do that sort of thing. But I think there's a good reason to think that that our mental state depends on those types of inputs as much as, say, our physical state. If you grow up for the first 5 years of your life not getting any physical exercise, that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. You may be able to overcome some of it or retrain and redevelop muscles and things, but it's a handicap. It makes it harder. And I think that we don't view these mental inputs and sensory inputs quite the same way we view, say, dietary inputs or activity inputs, exercise inputs. But I think there's just as much of a logical reason to expect the sensory inputs and positional inputs of various sorts and the language inputs of various sorts to be less than optimal if we're not doing the inputs the way we used to do it more in the past. I think our brains are designed to accommodate that, and that's what they're looking for, just like we're designed to be active. If we're not active and we just sit, we end up unhealthy physically, and I think if we don't get proper inputs, especially early, we end up unhealthy mentally. But again, that's fairly hypothetical, as you said at the beginning, but I think it makes good logical sense.
Yeah, I would agree. Like you said, I'd be keen to see some research into it as well, but it seems to make sense on face value. If we assume correctly there, then how could a modern family try and be a bit more, I guess, sensory healthy in that early environment for an infant?
Yeah. Well, again, it starts probably with some co-sleeping, or at least having the baby in the bassinet right up against the bed next to you. But then it proceeds by holding your baby a lot. In the States, in a lot of Western societies, it's just sort of a lost art of holding babies. You hold babies, you walk with them, you talk to them. Doing that in the first months and years is very important. Having them come along with you as much as you can when you're doing things. I mean, we obviously go to places now where the children are not welcome. They're probably not welcome at your job, and a lot of people, that you have to deal with that. But if you have other helpers around, having children interact socially with them as much as possible is just the way to go, I think.
Yeah, I find it interesting too. With it seems, I might be wrong, but it seems that only recently there's been the more of a push to actually get, especially when the baby's very, very young, is getting that skin to skin contact going, and that seems like it should be just a no brainer, but it seems like they've only just been pushing that a bit more recently.
Yep. No, absolutely. I think so. And, baby's vision is best from breast to eyes when they're little, for the first couple of months. And so holding your baby and breastfeeding the baby, or even if you're not breastfeeding, having that position and looking at your baby and talking to your baby, those are all very, very important inputs that some babies are missing out on. If you give your baby a bottle and prop up the bottle and walk into the other room while you're cooking dinner, that's something that baby's missing out on. So again, it's not that you have to be in 24/7 contact, but the more you can be in contact, the more babies around participating in a sense, I think the better. There are, this is a little off the wall, but there's some strange. If you look at other primates, they don't have the white conjunctiva, the whites of their eyes. It's all dark, so you can't see very well what a chimpanzee's looking at. You can't see. But in humans, we have the white, and that allows baby to follow. Whatever mom's looking at, baby can see and baby can look. And babies really cue into mom's eyes and grandparents' eyes and so on. And I think that is there just for that reason. We evolved that just in order to facilitate that face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact. Very early on in infancy, babies really tune into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I actually did pick up on that literally a couple of days ago. We were watching, I think there's a new David Attenborough gorilla documentary on Netflix, and when it was having the close-ups, that was something I actually picked up on, was how the eyes are essentially not the whole same color, but none of that white, so it's a bit trickier to see where they're looking. Yeah, interesting.
That's right. Yeah. I see in my practice, that even young babies, I'll be looking at them and, playing with them and trying to examine them and so on. And they're looking at mom or dad, looking for reassurance. If mom and dad are happy and smiling, and, then I'm okay. If mom looks apprehensive or scared, the baby's likely to start crying. They really cue in. They learn to be social very, very early on, and that's what childhood is about. And if we change their social environment too dramatically from what it was in the past, I think that babies are missing out on something. Now, I mean, of course, as they get older, they have to experience the modern environment and inputs too. I'm not saying we should all become hunter-gatherers, but especially early on, babies are really attuned to all that social interaction. They want to see you. They want face-to-face contact, eye contact.
So why do you think evolutionary explanations for health and behavior tend or can tend to stir up, quite a bit of pushback?
Well, I mean, there are a great number of people who just don't believe in evolution, first of all, and they bring it up and they think it's an affront to their religion and so on. And it's sort of strange because I know some evolutionary biologists who are pretty religious people, and I think what they think is that God or something made the rules, but science tries to figure out what the rules are and how things work, and so we can have some common ground, even if you don't really want to embrace evolutionary biology. You can still understand good design. We can disagree on who the designer is or what the designer is. But I think that there's some pushback just because of that. People just automatically, red flag evolution. That's wrong. I've gotten some comments back on blogs or other things, where people will say silly things like, "Oh, Darwin's theory has been disproven," and things like that. So there's some of that. From the medical field in general, those unfortunately, it's just not really taught much in medical school. I mean, I don't know what your experience was, but mine was in medical school that it was hardly mentioned. We focus on mechanisms and how things work and so on, but we rarely ask why they are the way they are. And I think if some of my friends in evolutionary medicine, Randy Nesse being one, I don't know, maybe you'd want to talk to Randy someday. He's one of the founders of evolutionary medicine. I could give a good word to him about you, but a lot of them are trying to push to get it more into medical training, medical schools, and so on. There's the evolution there's Evolutionary Medicine and Public Health is a journal that is out there publishing a lot of evolutionary stuff that some physicians are reading. There's the International Society of Evolutionary Medicine and Public Health. They're about to have a meeting in Germany, which I'm sorry I'm not going to, but I try to go to most of them. But so we're trying to work our way into the mainstream a little bit more, so we don't get that automatic pushback. But it's a struggle. It's hard to change people's thinking sometimes. If you're a physician and you've been practicing in a certain way for 30 years and somebody comes along and says, you could do that better, there's no, don't tell me that, how that is. So.
Yes, definitely. I think, that's the two good points there with I tend to agree, the not ignorance, but just lack of understanding and awareness to start with means that, of course, you're probably not going to have that viewpoint in the back of your brain going into different scenarios to start with. And I think, education when people are going through training is probably a great way to at least, just put that seed in the back of their brain for future. So then how do you personally tell the difference between a good evolutionary hypothesis and just a so story?
Yeah, well, I mean, in science, it all has to come down to evidence eventually. But there's an art to being a good theorist too. Not just in evolutionary biology. I think it was Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. That's a little self-serving because he was a very imaginative guy, a theoretical guy. He wasn't an empiricist. But ultimately it has to come down to studies and evidence. But you have to get good ideas out there. Science is a two-sided coin, right? It's ideas and evidence, theory and evidence, hypothesis and tests. You have to be able to make good predictions. You can't just, a just so story is you just assume it's true because you think it's a good story, and you can't. We want to avoid that. We want to be good scientists. But the problem is in traditional medicine right now, or I should say mainstream medicine, it is that we're so focused on mechanisms and laboratory stuff and all of that sometimes we don't ask that why question, and we don't look at we dismiss things that are hypothetical, even though they could be informing the way we collect and analyze our data. And so it's a balance, and just getting the ideas into the heads of young people, young medical students and residents and so on is going to be important.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree there. Even starting the journey when kids are at school and just sort of trying to explain some of the basics is probably a good way too. So, I think your advice and your vast sort of knowledge base, Paul, is really really interesting, and I'm super appreciative of your time today. Would you mind just flashing up your book one more time? So, Bringing Up Baby,
an Evolutionary View of Pediatrics, available on Amazon. Very
beautiful.
Cheap. Okay.
Beautiful. No,
all right,
that's great. I think. And what have you got coming up in the next near future? Anything on the horizon?
Well, yeah, I'm said I've been bored because my grandchildren are gone, but I started rewriting a paper I've been working on for a long time that has to do with the evolution of aging, which ties into the whole grandparent thing and all of that. So I'm working on that right now. I'll be hoping to get more involved in evolutionary medicine and public health journal, get some papers in there, and go to next year's International Society for Evolutionary Medicine and Public Health meeting, which is going to be in Toronto. If you have the freedom to do it, although you'll have a young baby, you would probably enjoy going to one of those conferences.
Yeah, I'm sure that'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
Man, hopefully one day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can talk them into having one in Australia. I'd love to visit Australia.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Come at a nice time of year as well.
Good.
But I've really enjoyed speaking to you today, Paul. I think it's been fascinating. So thanks again, and appreciate all your work.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed talking to you. I think your questions were excellent, and I hope I answered them okay. All right. Okay. Take care.